James OBarr's The Crow, one of those epic books that should be in everybody's library. Okay, and in the 5 years that I've been on YouTube, this is a book that I've always had in the back of my mind to do, but also didn't want to do it because the story of James OBarr and how the book The Crow came about is just as interesting as this book itself, because this is a book that is one in a million. I don't think there's ever really been anything published like it. Seriously, okay? And this video is going to be a little bit different because it's actually more about me and The Crow and meeting James OBarr and things. Because this book came out at a time where I'd been collecting comics for quite a while, and we were coming out of the 80s. I've been collecting comics, reading comics since '77. I considered myself a collector around '82. I bought my first comic book in '79. You know, I was just a kid and I was real young. And all of a sudden, there was something different going on. I don't think people realize, unless you were there, how big of a change the '90s were from the '80s and how fast it happened. A lot of people were really confused and stuff, and that's where it kind of turns into a personal venture myself here and stuff, okay? But a lot of things were going on, man. As a kid, you know, reading the comic books, there was that stigma that was going on. We're still reading comics. You were still, you know, on the outs. It was still, you know, in my view, it was kind of counterculture. You know, they're the ones missing out. I'm reading all this great stuff, and you know, this is my little thing with a few little friends here and there. You know, me and my brother would, I would buy comics, he would buy comics. We wouldn't buy the same comics, so we could share back and forth. You know, get more bang for our buck back then. You know, and then it was just kind of on the side. You stored your books in the closet, you went on with your life, but you still had this comic thing going on, right? And then it finally happened. You know, you know, as a teenager in rebellion and being part of that culture and stuff, you know, it was MTV Years. And even though I was listening to a lot of different music, you know, the hair bands of the 80s were really, you know, where the scene was back then, okay? I lived in one town, and I would go to the next town, and if you want to put that in high school terms, our rivals. And in that town, there was more of a community where everybody had the hair, everybody had the leather jackets, and everybody played an instrument. We're talking 30, 40 people. And it was really cool because, like, before you went to the skating rink on Saturdays, you would know a guy who, you know, you would go to somebody's garage or their living room, and people would always be having, you know, we're doing a band, we're going to play at the skating rink, there's a fair coming up, we're going to be doing this and doing that. But there was really no competition. If a bunch of guys got together, real quick the rehearsals changed, like, let's call this guy up because he knows how to play Paranoid by Black Sabbath. I was a bass player, so it was like, well, let's get Tim over here, you know, he can play some bass for us. Or the one song I sang was Inner Sandman at that time. You know, we're working our way into the 90s now because I could yell that whole song. You know, I heard the song the first time, and if it was Metallica, I completely did it. At the same time, the Ramones were kind of sneaking into my life a little bit. I was listening to the Pixies' Doolittle. That was starting to change everything for me. I was listening to, who sang Blister in the Sun, man? I would be on video going blank. Oh my gosh, the Violent Femmes. The Violent Femmes with American music was creeping in around the same time, the late 80s and stuff, and this music was finally starting to kind of creep in, you know. And I'd already grown up on the with my grandmother and stuff. I'd already listened to the, you know, 60s garage bands, and I knew doo-wop, and as a kid I found this shoebox full of cassettes at a little yard sale in the middle of, you know, a coal mining community where everybody was listening to the Oak Ridge Boys, and it just wasn't new for me. It was full of like old Motown and smooth music from the 70s, like the Manhattans and the Spinners and stuff, right? But this music as a teenager stuff, where you're trying to, you know, be part of something and everything like that, you know, the alternative music of the 80s was always kind of there underlined, and you didn't understand it. You didn't have the internet. The stuff wasn't really sold in the stores around here. It wasn't played on the radio. Every now and then you would run across a song like Who Is This, and you would never know. When the Pixies came out, I just didn't know what was going on. And then you go into the 90s, and things change so much, and you need 17 to 25, 18 to 25, that's the roughest time in a man's life ever. of what's going on, and I actually went hitchhiking for 9 months. But that's where the Crow, we're finally getting there, kind of comes in, right? Um, this book here, Comic Scene, this is how you were able to find out, some comic book news. If it wasn't on the grapevine, and it wasn't from other people that read comics, and you didn't quite know what was true and what wasn't. You would find books like this, like Comic Scene, coming out. And I find it very ironic that with the Rob Liefeld Youngblood, literally one of the worst comic books ever put out, for it to sell as much as it did. It was the first book of Image, and everybody was excited because in the comic book world, Jim Lee and you heard little tales of Todd McFarlane's jumping in on this, and Rob Liefeld's going, and everybody, and they're leaving Marvel, and they're going to do their own books, and they're going to call it Image Comics. It made the freaking CNN news in 1991. I remember that. But, so, of course I picked this up to see what's going on. And as I go through here, I found this article. And all of a sudden, I finally hear about the Crow. This is the place where I heard about the Crow. Because apparently in the underground, this book by James OBarr, The Crow, people have been waiting 2 years for the end of it. And as you read this article, and they show pictures of the Crow, and you hear James OBarr talking about it, you're just like, what is this? So my enthusiasm for Image actually transferred to, what is this Crow? I mean, it wasn't, I was excited for the book, but I was like, what is this? This is different. This is sophisticated. They're showing, they have, pages, and you're reading about this amazing looking book that's got this amazing buzz you've never heard of. And as I read this article and stuff, all it's really telling you is that James OBarr had sat down and in 1981 did the first issue of The Crow. The thing didn't get published till around 89. It became a cult sensation. I think it was through Caliber Press. And now Tundra has picked up, and they were, I don't know if these are the actual ones, but they went ahead and reprinted the earlier stories in anticipation of the one that fans have waited for 2 years. And you start hearing about how this isn't a superhero story. James OBarr starts explaining how the influences came from bands like Joy Division and the alternative music scene of the 80s. And this is a guy who's in America, and he knows all this stuff. And you look at these pages. Now, this is also a time of change in the 90s for me and stuff like that, because this is when, thanks to Nirvana, the mainstream was going to the alternative scene of music, and culture was kind of changing and stuff. And on top of Nirvana hitting, I remember the first time I heard Nirvana, I'd just graduated. I'm walking across my living room, MTV's on, and I hear Smells Like Teen Spirit, and I stop and I listen, and I'm like, cool. He whispers, then he shouts. They might be something. And that's all I thought about it. 2-3 months later, bam, they hit big, and everything has changed. And all of a sudden, James OBarr was referencing these bands that I was kind of listening to kind of on the side, and when I could get a chance to hear them, like somebody would have a cassette or something. And, that's what amazed me about this, because it was like all of a sudden those little things that were in the back of my mind influenced this whole book. James OBarr would go to work, and then he would play Joy Division. He dedicated the Crow book, or the first issue, to Ian of Joy Division, who died. The only song I really knew about Joy Division was Love Will Tear Us Apart, and that went into New Order. New Order, the only song I really listened to by New Order, they had 2 songs, but the only one, Blue Monday was the big one that I listened to. And then he started, and I loved the song Pretty in Pink before they had the horns in it for the movie, and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, that was blowing me away. To an 18, 19-year-old guy, that's just, a big deal at the time. You found something special here. And this also, on top of what was going on in my home and stuff at the time, which is much more important than just comic books, but the parallels and the way things kept loading up and everything like that, I started asking my comic friends, have you read about this Crow? And everybody was like, no, what are you talking about? And I would try to show them this, so I couldn't get a hold of the Crow. I wanted to know more about the Crow. I wanted to read this book. What is this about? It's a revenge story. He's not a superhero. It's not Batman. He's talking about the violence in it. Like 90% of it is like in the shadows and off the page, but people, think it's highly violent. And he's talking about how he's very careful with it, because what you're reading is that this man is saying this is art. All of a sudden, this man is approaching it with art, and it's a lover has been shot, and Eric Draven has returned a year later with a crow talking and guiding him to help him go after the guys that killed her. And he flat out says there's something like over 30 people killed in this last page. And then he said, one of the reasons it took so long for this book to come out is because it's 64 pages and he redrew 50 of them, to make sure that he was handling it with a maturity and a class and an integrity in it. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? Then the Image books came out. Pretty art, no story. Nobody still talked about this. And I go hitchhiking. I forget completely about the Crow. I end up spending 9 months on the road, more or less, back and forth, and kind of a blur, and things were going on. And I come back. And as I come back and I get settled and I get on with my life and get jobs, military, girlfriend, stuff like that, working my way through, those messy years and stuff, this movie gets announced. I think this Crow movie came out in 94. Oh my gosh. We'll say it is. I'm not sure. But in this article, they also already said there was going to be a Crow movie, so I wasn't surprised. And one of the people that was going to be the Crow they were talking about was Christian Slater and a guy named Charlie Sexton. The only Charlie Sexton I knew had like one album in the 80s came out that I was aware of or something, right? So I come back and I'm not surprised. And then all of a sudden, this is a point in my life where I felt like I was in a Salinger novel. And I was really disappointed in people and stuff because I'd already asked these people if they knew anything about the Crow, and I start like feeling like I'm Holden in Catcher in the Rye when it comes to the sincerity of people and how a lot of things are fake and stuff. Because like all of a sudden everybody are Crow, they're Crow experts. Everybody knows the Crow. The same people I'd already asked before, and they had no idea what it was, and they were just kind of looking at me funny. And that insincerity and stuff at such a young age with the Crow. Everybody being in it and everybody being just like it's a trend or something. I really had a problem with that. I've known a lot of these people for a long time, and I knew what they read because we talked about it and stuff. Not a lot of people. And in an odd way, the Crow helped me kind of grow up and realize that people don't have the same hearts, and people will do things and say things to make themselves look good. Like I said, it was like a Salinger novel about the insincerity of people and how they can fake things. Maybe some people's gone through something like that. Maybe they haven't, man. But it's really like the bloom is off the rose when it comes to people in general. Not a bitter thing, just sort of a bitter pill to swallow when it comes to people. And I'm sure I've been guilty of it. So this Crow movie comes out, and I'm kind of excited. And thanks to the Crow movie coming out, I finally am able to get to this very book. You can see how beat up it is, okay, of the Crow. And we finally get in there, and I finally get to read this thing before the movie comes out. And years later, like I bought this like in 93, 94 when it came out. And years later, I got to actually meet James OBarr in 2010. But it wasn't exactly the kind of meeting that I expected. Because James OBarr really flipped me out when I met him. Great guy, one of the nicest guys you can meet, but it's not what I had built up in my head. Because what had happened was that the story of how the book really came out, what he really did in the book, why he really wrote the book, got exposed when this DVD came out. Now, I didn't get the VHS copy in the 90s after the movie came out. This is one of the first DVDs that I bought, so I'm going to assume I bought it like around 2001, 2002. But there's a second disc in here where James OBarr looks like he's down in a basement, and he's at the drawing board, and he's explaining his art, and he's showing how he uses watercolors from Kmart, and he starts telling his life story. And things that happened in The Crow were actually a very cathartic thing for him for a long time, because all of a sudden you hear about this hellish life that James OBarr lived. He was in foster homes. The reason he got into art and stuff like that was, because of he couldn't do anything. He had very little money, so he got art supplies at Kmart. Nothing wrong with that. I kind of related to the idea of using cheap stuff. He actually got failed in art in high school because he refused to draw stupid circles and shade them and stuff. Like, it was like, really? He felt like it was condescending. When he talked about after he got out of the foster homes, he met this one girl. And when he met the girl, it's like he got the taste of a normal life. Like he a lot of people get caught up in the idea of, like, the one. When you're a man, you get the idea that there's the one out there for you, and you kind of get the idea that James OBarr actually met the one. Now I'm going to stop there and tell you what everybody thought The Crow was about. Everybody always wanted to know, where did you come up with this idea? And what you started hearing is that he just read an article about a couple in a car, that were more or less carjacked in Detroit. He just read it in the paper and was like, that'd be, this is a story I came from two people getting shot over having a car stolen and stuff. So as this interview goes and I'm reading this and stuff, it just turns into this thing where you can't stop listening to him. And you find out that the girl, his one that he had met the first time that he probably felt love in his life and he felt like he's going to have a normal life and probably a family and all these dreams and stuff, she gets hit by a drunk driver. Not only did she get hit by a drunk driver, she's just walking down the sidewalk, and he came up on the sidewalk in broad daylight. And it's so random and out of the blue. So all of a sudden, all he does is he works on cars at a body shop, and he goes home, listens to his music, and started drawing The Crow. And this was very cathartic for him. And while he's doing this, and this artist that's inside of him is actually putting this down, to pen and paper, he's influenced by things like Will Eisner. He's influenced by all this music he's listening to. Eric Draven's body is actually based on Iggy Pop's body. He has poems in here. The man also reads poems and things that he's stuck in here with Eric Draven. He has lyrics in here by The Cure, The Hanging Garden. He references Joy Division in this and stuff. And all of a sudden, he's just shaped and molded this story, starting in 1981 for 8-9 years, going all the way up to 92 before issue 4 came on. So this turns into an 11-year journey for him over losing the love of his life, the first love he probably really felt. Like I said, he based Eric's body on Iggy Pop. This led to the second movie where Iggy Pop was in the movie, the Inferior City of Angels and stuff, but this was a poster I actually had when the movie came out. This is the first issue of the miniseries that adapted the movie, and they actually had a poster of this Tim Bradstreet, and Iggy Pop was in the movie and on the cover. And it was like referencing all these things that I listened to. Because Iggy Pop was actually one of those artists that I always kind of like David Bowie, man. Like, as a kid, I could watch and listen to it and enjoy it, but every now and then they would do something that kind of freaked me out. My young mind, it just wasn't for me. It was too sophisticated and artsy, and as a kid it was just like really out there, stuff that I love now, and I grew to understand it and stuff. So all of a sudden, just to have that backstory and to finally meet James OBarr and to know about the drugs that's going on, and at the same time he's doing this interview, he's living with another girl, and they're like yelling back and forth, something that just, when I heard yelling like that, it wasn't good in the house. But here, this is how they get along and stuff. Apparently that was their thing. So I'm at Heroes Con, and I finally get to meet James OBarr, and I meet the guy, and the way he talks and he shakes, and he's kind of manic. He was being funny, but I just got overwhelmed with knowing what this guy had gone through and reading this book and how personal this book is and everything that's in there. And I just had a moment where I just didn't know what to say, and I felt like I needed to walk away. And this is where it's kind of bizarre at another level. This was also the first time I met Jim Starlin, because I kind of got James OBarr signed this book for me, and I was able to get 5 words out about a story that he has in this book called Pink Dust, where he has Wile E. Coyote chasing the Roadrunner while he's driving a Roadrunner car. And I knew how James OBarr worked on cars and body shops and stuff. I was able to get a little conversation out of him. So I'm like completely just like blown away, a million miles away, thinking about this guy's life that he shared on this and stuff. And it's just a little bit overwhelming. And I turn around, there's Jim Starlin. And I'm like, first time I ever met Jim Starlin, and I'm like, that's where I just was like, it's too much, and I just walked away. Didn't say a word to Jim Starlin. I ended up I smoke a cigarette with him every now and then and stuff when I see him at Heroes Con and stuff. So that's The Crow in me, man. Those teenage years, how it went from the 80s. This guy was ahead of the bar with having that artistic mind, and that's buried because of this hellish life, and how he came up with The Crow. And the art in here, if to do a proper review, I would sit here and tell you, like, you can see the artwork of his 1981 stuff. How amateurish and bad it is, and how this guy's experimenting, and I can't, he's doing his own thing. This is somebody that is just, it's like a completely fresh approach, and the guy's sort of making his own rules up. He doesn't go to school to learn any of this. He's kind of a student of the art. He's obviously read comic books before, and all of a sudden he's sticking in poems and stuff to read with little extra art that he's done on the side. But to realize that this was like 1981 that he was doing this, and to see his art really improve over the years, like that's 1981. That is highly Will Eisner influenced, And then by the time that the years go by, and the things that he puts in here is just devastating. Some of the art that he puts in here. One of my favorite 2-page spreads in here just blows my mind with his art. I mean, how he got into the cross hatching and the blacks and just everything he was doing. We end up having more or less a Jesus Christ pose in here, as he, the gutter of this book has stolen some of the art, but just to see how far he went and how he learned about doing the tones and everything by reworking and reworking all this art and things. So when you go through this book and you read it, man, you're just on a journey of a man set on revenge and of sorrow and pity and feeling for himself. Because James OBarr just lived a life where he'd go to work and he'd go home and work on the book, and he'd go to work and he'd work on the book, and it was all cathartic. I mean, I have no idea what his goals were, if he even thought he was ever going to see print. So when you read this, man, there's emotions that'll come up. There's emotions printing on here. There's an honesty of this artist in here that I thought was very brave to do, and then to put in here, and to have this mystique put around it. And there's this zeitgeist that was going on in the 90s when this was going on. For people who were there, maybe you'll be able to put it together, and for you that weren't there, sorry you missed out. But there's this zeitgeist because all of a sudden it became about the crows. You had the Crow movie come out. You had Sheryl Crow popping in there. You had a band called Counting Crows. All of a sudden, it was this zeitgeist of crows popping up all of a sudden. And yet, the book came from tragedy. And sadly enough, tragedy followed into the movie. On a superstitious level. Because they got Bruce Lee's son, Brandon Lee, who came in. And this was his breakout movie. He'd already acted in a few things. But Brandon Lee comes on here. He does the Crow. And thanks to a prop gun that actually had a real bullet in it, while filming, Brandon Lee is shot and killed. So there's like this black cloud that just follows OBarr and the Crow around in real life and things. So when you meet a guy like that, and you know this inside information, and you look at him, and you see him in the flesh, and you see him as a real person, it kind of click something in me that I've never been able to put my finger on and stuff. So that's why it's one of those real personal books and things. Do I want to review The Crow and get into the book? I would love to, not waste your time, but it's really something to get in there, and you're going to, it's an experience when you read it. Don't listen to country music, and don't don't read it while it's raining. But you'll see the soul of a man pouring out on a page is what you're going to see, and that's the real magic of The Crow.